Hello guys, welcome back to another video on the YouTube channel. Thank you guys all for the support on this last video. I know I say that a lot, but it really means a lot to me because I see all the support and I appreciate it. In this video, I'm gonna do something I haven't done in a little bit. I'm doing some actual horror stories this time actually, and these are true horror stories from Reddit. Instead of the usual am I the asshole, I wanted to change it up for this video. So, without further ado, let's get straight into it. This first story is about camping in the Appalachians. A few years back, my girlfriend and I have hiked several other parts of the Appalachian Trail. We decided we wanted to give the southern part of the Virginians Trail a shot. It's about 166 miles long and it runs through George Washington and Jefferson National Forest from Roanoke to the Pearisburg in Giles County. This is definitely one of the more remote and less traveled parts of the trail, which is exactly what we are looking for. We got all our gear and we made our way to the start of the Virginia Creeper Trail to begin our journey. We had planned our journey to end at Damascus and figured that by the time we got there, we would be more than ready to get home to our own beds. It was early October and the changing of the leaves and colors were amazing. The air was crisp and cool. Perfect hiking weather with beautiful scenery. The majority of the trip was pretty uneventful, just your typical hike, but our last couple of nights is where things got weird. On the portion of the trail, you're supposed to camp on the trail or a designated shelter. We didn't really want to run into other people and we didn't want anyone coming up on us in the middle of the night, so we decided to ignore those suggestions and we found our little spot off on the trail. A little searching around and we found a spot a little ways off the trail in the middle of a small clearing. It was perfect. We set up camp, cooked some food, talked for a while, and then snuggled up and went to sleep for the night. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I was woken up by my girlfriend shaking me awake, telling me, "Get your gun, someone's outside walking around our tent." She informed me that she woke up to what sounded like someone right outside of our tent, running a knife or something along the side while circling us. While hiking, I always carry a 1911 and a judge with me. You never know exactly who or what you might run into when on such a long hike in a remote location. I got the judge out of my pack and then we sat silently listening for any sounds. A few minutes of nothing but the breeze blowing through the trees and then I heard it. Snap, crunch, snap. Someone or something walking in the woods behind our tent. I got the flashlight and silently made my way out of the tent. Our fire had went out so it was nearly pitch black, illuminated by only the dim glow of the October moon. I told my girlfriend to stay put while I checked it out. I didn't flick the flashlight on right away so as to not give anything away. Instead, I waited to hear some more noises. After a few minutes, snap, crunch, crack, it sounded like it was a bipedal based on the way the steps were paced. I turned on the flashlight and flooded the area with light. I thought I saw someone move behind a tree. I yelled out and told them to go away and that I was armed. I kept the light on the area with my gun drawn and slowly approached towards the area where I thought I saw the figure. Then, from my right, I hear what sounds like someone running away through the woods. I spin and face my light that way, and from the original spot hear who or whatever was there take off into the woods. There's no way I'm giving chase, so I return to the campsite. I tell my girlfriend about what happened and I end up sitting guard outside the tent in the darkness until daybreak. In the morning, I looked a bit for signs of who or whatever it was and I discovered a boot print in some soft, moist dirt not far from our tent. It wasn't mine and it wasn't my girl's. This freaked me out as it confirmed that someone, perhaps more than one, was skulking around our tent in the dark. I kept it to myself because I didn't want to freak my girl out any more than she already was. At this point, we were pretty deep and still had 2 days left. That day we walked a little faster than normal and covered as much ground as possible. When it came time to set up camp, I found a spot near a cliff where we would place the tent in a small overhang and prevent anyone from coming up behind us. The whole day up to this point, I had a feeling we were being followed. I had no confirmation of this as I hadn't seen or heard anyone, but it was just this gut feeling. We set up camp and we made some food. Then we retreated to the tent. I gave my girl the 1911 and I kept the judge right next to me and I assured her that if I slept at all, it would be with one eye open. After a while, she drifted off to sleep and I stayed awake listening to the sounds of the woods at night. I was awake for a few hours just waiting to see if anything was going to happen. At some point, I guess my exhaustion caught up with me and I drifted off. I awoke sometime later to what sounded like someone going through our stuff outside the tent. I grabbed my gun and woke my girlfriend, shushing her to be quiet. From the faint glow of the fire, I could see someone's silhouette against the tent. There was really someone out there. I yelled out to them something along the lines of, "We are armed, get out of here." They dropped what they were doing and bolted. I came out of the tent, gun drawn and ready to shoot someone. Our stuff was strewn all about. They had rummaged through quite a bit of our stuff. I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction of who was out there had fled. There was a creek nearby and I walked to the edge where there was a small trail running alongside it. Down the creek I could see a light. It looked like a lantern the way it flickered. Then I saw 3 more emerge from the other side of the woods. I told my girlfriend to start packing up whatever she could and that we were leaving now. We packed up everything of value. We left the tent and a few other items and headed back onto the trail in the middle of the night. I kept hearing people talking off in the woods and hearing branches snap for quite a few ways. I kept looking behind us every few seconds to make sure nobody was coming up on us. It was completely nerve-wracking. If something happened, we were still a very long way from anywhere and quite literally on our own, since we hadn't really seen another hiker the entire time we'd been out there. I really felt like we were in serious danger. We had been walking for quite some time when I heard something in the woods behind us. As we rounded a corner, I turned and saw someone step out onto the trail and just stand there watching us. It was just as the sun was coming up and barely any light. I couldn't make out any of their features, just the silhouette. I stopped and looked at them for a second and asked them who they were and what they wanted. They just stood there silently, watching us, and then turned and walked back into the woods. We picked up the pace and kept going, looking back every so often. We never saw that person again. But my gut told me they were still there for quite a few ways. We eventually reached the end of the trail and got back to where we had parked my girlfriend's car, extremely exhausted. We made it outside of the Virginia woods without becoming a meal for a clan of cannibalistic inbred hillbillies, which is what I pictured happening in my head the whole time. I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. Maybe it was someone just messing with us. Maybe it was really a clan of deformed hillbillies who are hunting us. I will never know because I will never be returning to find out. This next story is called Violin Hill. Around 2 years ago, I finally moved into a brand new house in a brand new building estate in Australia. I was one of the first to have finished built in the area, and I was elated to finally gain independence. The first few weeks went as normal as anything during that time. I'd often take walks alone with dogs in the afternoon and roam the surrounding estate area. All the roads around us had been partially completed and all the other properties were marked out, but no other houses were built, excluding one that was directly opposite mine. The house looked finished, but there was no driveway laid out, and from what I could gather, no one lived there. To the left of my house, roughly a few hundred meters away, was a field with a huge hill on it. I later found out that the whole area was council property. Not only was no one allowed to build up there, but the whole hill was basically a no-go zone. For whatever reason, the council just didn't want people on it. The whole area was surrounded by a huge chain-link fence. The only other noticeable feature in the area was a small abandoned farmhouse with a shed a few kilometers down the road. I knew nothing about it and often went walking around there with the dog, as it gave me something mild to explore among the vast nothingness I was living around. The entire place was dilapidated and completely inhabitable, but it was still interesting nonetheless. About a month or two after moving in, I awoke one morning to the sound of a violin. It sounded extremely distant and quite haunting. I actually quite enjoyed it and assumed that the neighbor opposite had finally moved in. Excited that I finally had someone to talk to, I peeked out the curtain and saw the house opposite mine was still as vacant as it ever was. I got dressed, but by the time I managed to look outside, the violin had stopped. This happened roughly every second day for the next week. The violin would wake me up and then just disappear after about 45 seconds. I'd ignored it to the point to where my curiosity simply got the better of me, and the next morning when I heard the violin playing again, I immediately jumped out of bed, threw on my dressing gown, and shot for the straight front door. I scoured the early morning surrounding, and there, up on the hill, was a figure playing a violin. It was barely light, but the person looked very tall from the distance I was at, and as they were playing, was doing what I could only describe as a waltz-type walk, spinning slowly around in a circle as they played. I took my eyes off the person and walked over to pick up the morning paper, and in the 10 seconds that took me, I heard the violin stop. When I looked up, I noticed the figure was neither playing nor dancing, but was now standing still and almost likely looking in my direction. It was so dark I couldn't make out and more, and we both just stood there for about half a minute not moving before the creeps got the better of me and I went back inside. After that morning, things started happening. On my walks, I began to notice footprints on the surrounding properties that weren't made by me and that I'd never seen before, which I assumed were from people walking up from the other housing areas down the road. I never awoke to the violin, but I swore I could hear someone walking on the street next to my bedroom window in the early mornings. However, I never saw anything. Other really general things as well, like random tools such as spades and rakes laying around the area which I guessed were there from some construction crews, none of which I ever saw. I started getting calls at work that would immediately hang up on me, and I also stopped walking up to the abandoned farmhouse as the experience with the violin player had me a little shaken. One night as I was heading to bed, I turned off the television in the living room and again, I could hear the faint sound of a violin playing. However, it sounded more muffled and rehearsed. I froze and a cold chill flowed through me instantly. Considering that it was about midnight and not the usual time I'd heard it playing, I went to the front window and peeked out to see that there was a light in the house opposite mine. It was clearly a candle as I could see the dim light flicker in the empty window, and the music sounded like it was coming from an old record player. But in the 10 minutes I watched, I never saw a single movement inside that house. I moved away from the window sufficiently freaked out, and after another 5 minutes, I heard the music abruptly stop. I peeked out again to notice that the light was now out. I never saw anyone. I began to become unsettled in the house and would often invite friends over to hang out until late, but of course nothing would ever happen when someone else was with me. I never bothered to tell any of my friends, as without evidence, I'd figured they'd just give me shit about it, and I'd just become more agitated. But nothing compared to what happened next. In my living area, the desk sits right next to a small window which looks out to the fence surrounding my property. The steel fence is literally an arm's length from the house and about 6 feet tall, so I always figured that unlike most of the other windows, I'd never need to cover this one with a sheet or a blanket because no one could ever see in. I usually had headphones on when I played, and I always had the light off, for no other reason that I preferred to play games in the dark. One night when I was gaming, I got up and walked into the dark kitchen and got a beer out of the fridge. It was dead silent, excluding the faint sound of something coming from my headphones. As I closed the fridge and turned around to face the desk, I saw directly out the window 2 very, very faint lights. I didn't even catch on and immediately started walking back to the desk, fixating on the small glowing balls, and it wasn't until I had my nose almost pressed against the glass that I realized the 2 lights weren't lights at all. They were eyes. A set of eyes, sitting just above the fence line, staring wide open at me. They didn't blink, they didn't move. As my entire body locked up, all I could do was simply stare back as my brain was still comprehending that there was an actual person looking at me in the scariest way I could possibly ever imagine. I don't know what happened. Either my head kicked into gear or my muscles loosened, but my body automatically collapsed and I fell to the floor, scurrying to hide against the wall away from the window. I could hear my heart beating through the carpet like a drum as I tried to lay as flat as possible, and as my mind was still processing the sheer severity of the situation, a violin started playing. That same violin and the same haunting tool it always emitted started up, except this time, it was directly outside my window and much louder than it had ever been before. The lights were still off and I wanted to get up to turn off the PC screen so I couldn't be seen, but my whole body was just not ready to cooperate. Not only was the sound of the instrument extraordinarily loud, but it sounded like it had been playing with frustration. Notes had been missed frequently, and the strings screeching. The pace of it was getting faster and faster, and by the time my dog Jeb was out in the backyard, had picked up on the situation and registered an unfamiliar song, gave one solitary deep bark. The violin instantly stopped, and the house was finally dead silent, excluding my headphones, which I could hear quietly working away. I was still frozen to the carpet, and it wasn't until Jeb gave a second menacing bark that I figured that the figure outside the window started to walk away in the direction of my yard. Once the first footstep hit the ground, I instantly thought of the welfare of my best mate, and finally my head connected with my extremities and my entire body kicked into overdrive. I leapt from the ground and slid across the laminated floor to the back door where Jeb was standing, staring into the backyard. I ducked to keep low and quietly unlocked and slid open the door. Usually doing so would notify Jeb that he was allowed inside, but when the door opened up, he didn't move an inch and was completely fixated on the pitch black backyard. Everything told me not to go outside, but there was no chance I was letting anything happen to my dog, and I moved out into the alfresco, moved behind Jeb, put my hand under his collar, and attempted to back him towards the house. Jeb is a pure Labrador and weighs like a sack of sand, so when he doesn't want to move, it takes a sheer force to pull him in the direction you want him to go. And right now, Jeb was not going anywhere. I yanked at his scruff, and as I did, he emitted a bark like I had never heard before. A deep, bellow, fuck you right off sound that elevated my nerves to an all-time high. We both just stood there, waiting for some form of reply, and I couldn't remember how long we both just froze there, but eventually I heard footsteps from around the side of the house begin to walk away. But not a simple walk, almost like whoever was doing it very slowly, dancing in a circle, the footsteps keeping to a beat as they drifted off away from the house into the distance. Once I couldn't hear anything, Jeb licked his lips, gave me a look, and wandered back inside. I followed, locked the door behind me, and spent the night reverting to my childlike self, hiding underneath my bed covers with my dog. I didn't sleep a single wink. This was the last time I ever heard or saw the violin player. The following morning, when the sun finally came up, I called into work sick and called the police. They scoured the lot next to mine and found footprints in the dirt. However, there were so many that it was impossible to tell whose were whose. The only description I could give the officer was his height. He would have to be over 6 feet to stare over that fence at me, but they explained that he could have been standing on something else or even on his toes. They also told me that they never received a report of anyone playing a violin in the area, or anyone in the fenced-off hill either. I essentially looked like an insane person, but the officers were very nice about the whole thing and offered to patrol the area for the next few nights, which helped put my mind at ease. Nothing else has happened since then. Over the next year or so, people finally started moving in, and I told them all the story about the figure I saw, some of which still use it to keep their children in watch, which I find funny. One guy nicknamed the council lot Violin Hill, and the name has stuck around our street since then. I even spent a period of time scoring the depths of the internet for the violin tune I kept hearing, but I could never find it. There's a few classical pieces that seem reminiscent, but I've since noticed that whichever tune was played must have been self-composed, which creeps me out even more. I'm still in the house. I still tell people the story, and I haven't changed my routine one bit, which would really help me block out the fear of the experience. I game with the blinds closed now. Edit. I've been thinking more and more about the whole ordeal lately after writing the story, and decided to go charge up my old phone that was in the bottom of a box in the back room to see if there was any pictures from the past I'd taken. Sure enough, I found this, a picture of Violin Hill from when I first moved in. This was even before the rest of the connecting roads existed, and there is just this country surrounding me. From my very vague memory, the figure I saw was just standing almost above the red and white post in between the trees on the top of the hill. Like I said, they were very far away and the sun was only just coming up. The fence was also quite dilapidated and temporary when I moved in, but as more people started to arrive and the roads were laid down, the council put up a proper perimeter to block off the hill. I'm looking at the image, which you can check for yourself if you want after watching this video. I'll leave the story in the comment, but it does seem to be a pretty far hill from where this person is. So I think it's kind of crazy that they could hear it, which is really interesting. But if you want to check out that picture, then I'm going to leave the story in the description, which I always do, so you can check that out. Oh man, those stories were actually really scary. Like, even when I was reading them, I can't lie, I got some chills. They were pretty scary. Let me know what you guys think about these stories. in the comments down below. I'll make sure to respond to any of you guys down there. And, you know, give me your thoughts on what you want. Yeah. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you all if you made it this far, and I will see you in the next one.